남의 제면 뇌매 이면 소면 담에 제면 레자면 제면도 미게 감면만에 이게 남아시베 관계 바도야 마리바메 마리반 세바 가시메 가진 세베 바도야 대신도 동해와다 구조한다고 남의 이시면 도바 마도바요 체르보 대다가나 전주 삼만나 도바 셔라예 바로도 심발하든지 섬라드 도바메도 신조를 신도되네 양아를 산제 단제 샤라예 바로 심발하든지 양다바 소베 전주도 홍보소바사 대다가나 셔라예 바로도 침배 비바 침배가 나나메베가 미야바다니 동해 단제라도 시와지 미즈마나 덴바시바 셔라예 바로 침배가 메바다야 가데 바라 상가데 부데 셔르보 전주 삼바삼바 대다 셔라예 바로 심바 사모라라 얘네 좀내내 된데래 전주 삼바 오바셔레스 황쇼라레소 시자와 로로로리게 모데데 셔노리게 모데데 시다교게 덴바신도 셔라예 바로 사모라 저바저데 디신 샤바나냐 지수 좀내되게 되게 제가 전에 서단 셔르드도 바라 전주 삼바 아바셔레스 원주 탐제다데 오르로로로로 메로로마 주도지베 시대 오마누노 칼라제베 에조도마나 모셔주르 마베도 두바바라 마이 모셔드네소 간르소 차세루 아가사마르자 나도전하라도 말아야메 샤라라자 마라야메 대야타 가데 바라 상가데 보다 오바군조 성게 가이데 메고 진 오바니 저게 보체미네 초랭에 제대구루에서 오 기르는 알았어요. 기르는 알았어요. 기르 나오나. 여주시와다메 대화단데 마주제면서 소유는 내내슈 자가리 균주르 말베 편소게 열어주베 주메고 다예르베레와고 말레시자지진스베르 샤제도 의샤스 남의 정바 대세계 조제베 저버근게 군안에 dom에진 매바잠베 양라 의샤스 신조바 말가 아와제베 요시신 고마린 세상에 로르 dom에진 도소자베 샤라 의샤스 신자셔군이 일레레주베 사마나와 제제베 나마나요 도데스제 마멘 셀라드 용지게 신예 용계 거제베 동소 주바제 다시드니 중대령 보지 신예다 의샤스 롱메 토라 정배 보도와다베 신제군베 정화와 주바님 보제베 예제구제 송라스 와즈 장주 도진 조근 보진세 라바라의 신도 신계로니데로와 로마인세 샤라 의샤스 당신신제 수시소 오도리베 원조제도제 동안에베 다보제로제 자와이 의샤스 여와세베고 바레 처라니바 소라마르제베 동아와 자연수제 샤라그 스 조건대라그 도제 정보 지바군 연대 정보 신인 조제와 참제수제 의샤스 대나센제님과 메세네라르제 산제고마다년 연대조개 샤라그 샤스 잠베님부 롱도 쇠쇠로 원고년은 자서베네제도가 주드 응을선하자수 그차스 빌리연된 말이야 주변에 지면로선에베 감사들 수리자들 아들님들이 먹으셔서 사람들이 다시 아들의 청마다시니 되는 나를 그리스도의 아노도 요소그셔서 뉴질레로 우예하게 와라라는 것을 그거는 내가 요소그셔서 로저스과 재미 결혼해서 내려와 세상에 줄을 제대로 法的一切王不归下次。
你对啥事家的？
因那位赶紧做了随便的我就心给就是。我想被多数归下次。
叫我滚了他个。
把这些行动老把的一些个抽给这个老把的这边你毛归下次。
路上单边中人，身上奴隶样个些世俗。
我要做归下次。
那老王就路上。
把这个下面你毛的在归给做七岁自认叫什么？7岁老妹下了归下次。
那个我就赶上南边做，用说单边是。
现在这边在接触的人叫做昨天就7岁老妹。
路上结婚对别摆的是。
这都是给这样这边我我就先不归下次。
路上单边。
他说在我面前在这老妹这边看到上面推了，这来叫做归老归下次。也从多人家钱也给所先被外来起来了说，我把这边的老归下次。下半年都在世界去给你们的给了。从没去最老马归下次。
让小松肉过了，大概没给上他们这个什么就再给呗。
现在新年老归下。
叫松跟着老马多些上。
老刚都新年送。
查查就我就真是个真正老马。
老归下。 유보 제변 반대가 됐어요. 한번 용소 땜뱅 맛 여근 여원 담지 세보 첨보 취선 아와 로상 예셰된 스소 원유 송바 대배성 생안의 태보 침배순 사모 슈베 생아 의원교 도시 조회 등도 신의여 노소 바도냐메 선진 반직 대녀장 소녀소녀 도보소녀와 신제로
这样想去偏那上这样说，你们就想去等我嘛，是吧？啊，这想去东西啊。
这么牛呢？是爱的爱是爱情，爱所谓爱小没爱没爱梦不所爱的爱是爱的爱落爱所爱的爱爱是也爱爱爱没。爱没爱是爱是爱爱家主算，这爱是爱家，爱是爱家没，爱是爱乱是爱算开爱是。爱是爱之爱之，爱爱个，爱是爱是，是爱呀爱是爱呀，爱没爱呀爱的爱，爱你爱是爱么，是爱之爱没爱你，爱没属。爱是爱上了，爱不爱我，你爱说爱你爱你，谁爱只爱要爱你爱我，谁没爱你我，就爱么爱面说。是也奈奈多奈之心，奈谁爱之爱小爱所爱也爱之爱心，爱所爱的爱是奈心，也奈心吧。
그렇지.
The merits I collect from listening to the teaching may they become cause for me to become Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Do you want to call friends here so the monks can move? So I prostrated the Buddha, the Gautama, who out of compassion taught the holy Dharma in order to rid us of all wrong views, distorted views. So today, in Lhasa, in Tibet, the land of Dharma, this Mönlam prayer festival was started around 700 years ago by Lama Tsongkhapa. And so during this period of time, we do our best to accumulate merit, make offerings, and do virtuous practices. And since we became exiles, refugees, perhaps we missed this celebration 1 year, but otherwise we had celebrated it every year. The reason or the purpose of having this Mönlam prayer festival coincides with the Buddha himself, the Shakyamuni historical Buddha, having competed in miracles with non-Buddhist teachers in those days. And so this month is called the month of miracles. And so we celebrate this in connection with these miraculous deeds that the Buddha performed during that competition. So in order to remind us of, commemorate those events. Now with regard to the practice of the Dharma, it is mainly done with by using our mind. Perhaps it is said in Nagarjuna or Aryadeva, there is a Dharma which is done by physical body, and then there's also Dharma in listening to, which is mainly focused on listening to the Vedas or the sounds of the teachings, and then there is a Dharma which is focused on the mind. So in India in those days, there is the practice of penance or which is physical, and then there's a Dharma, which considers the sound of certain teachings sacred, such as the Vedas, listening to the Vedas. And even today, in one of the holy sacred traditions is that of Jainism, which has a great practice of non-violence. 93. And so the Jainism practices do their practice. The followers of Jainism do their practice in order to, by avoiding harming other sentient beings. And then there are other non-Buddhist traditions which focus on other rituals and so forth. Whereas Buddhism is about using our mind, mainly focusing on the mind itself, not so much on the sound and physical things. The paths and grounds of spiritual progression are done based on our minds. They do not have anything to do with the physicality of our practice, such as changing our dimensions physically and so forth. And therefore, this master has said, therefore the Buddha's teaching is very subtle. And so on this occasion, coinciding with the Buddha's having performed the miracles, we commemorate him, and with in doing so, we do lots of virtuous practices. Many of us, when we talk about doing some virtuous practice, consider doing prostration or going around temples and reciting mantras as being the practice of Dharma. But these are easier to do. Even when we do some kind of a retreat where we confine ourselves to a room for a certain period of time, although physically we are isolated from others, but if what we need to do during those retreats is to isolate our mind from all kinds of preoccupations, preconceptions, and that is the main purpose of doing the retreat. Merely reciting mantras is, according to Ala Shanghawa, who was a great Tashikil monk, master from Amdo, has said that even if you may recite some mantras hundreds of thousands of times, it may not diminish your wear out or diminish your negative thoughts and emotions, but by reciting the mantras and using the malas, your nails might wear out. And so, in order to do away with the afflictive thoughts and emotions, the negative, destructive thoughts and emotions, we need to use our mind and apply the antidotes to these destructive thoughts. We have faith in the Dharma, but we rather remain superficial in our practice. It's very rare to find people who really focus on the real practice of the Dharma. And on the other hand, some people consider the Dharma or religion as some kind of a custom, and not really don't pay much attention to understand what the Dharma is about, and they don't really try to study them. Friends, when I go around different places, I ask to Buddhists what Buddhism is, and many of them have no real good answer. Last year I visited in the Himalayan regions, in Lahore Spiti region, and the people in those regions, in that region, are of course Buddhists, and they came to see me, and I asked them what Buddhism is. And they answered, it's saying I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And then I asked, what is the Buddha, what is Dharma? And they said they didn't know. And similarly, in one school, Buddhist school, Indian Buddhist school, they recite this verse, the lines, Buddha, I take refuge in the Buddha, I go for refuge into the Dharma, I take refuge in the Dharma. I asked them what Buddha is, what Dharma and Sangha is, and they didn't have answer. A Tibetan who went to Australia recently, and on his way back to India, he met on the plane. He met Chinese women, and they had a casual talk. And then this person asked the Chinese lady what Buddhism. We talked. India talked. The Chinese lady said she was Buddhist, and then the person asked what Buddhism is, and this lady said it's burning an incense in front of a Buddha statue, and doing that kind of practice is Buddhism. So most of us do not really understand and do not study what Buddhism is. And so if Buddhism is merely about saying I take refuge in the Buddha and so forth, then we do not need all these great canonical texts. In the other religious traditions, there are not so many texts like we have in Buddhism. Most of the religious traditions are theistic religions, who assert that the followers have to keep their faith in the God, and there's not. But in the non-Buddhist traditions of India, there are very deep philosophical traditions as well. And Buddhism is very vast, and also it has a very profound philosophical theory. And therefore, according to the mental dispositions of the followers, the Buddha himself taught different philosophies. And also there are many different interpretations of the teaching of the Buddha by different masters. And so we cannot merely suffice with faith in the Buddha, and because the different philosophical thought in Buddhism evolved because of different mental dispositions of different people. And so therefore we need to do analysis, use our intelligence. And whether it's Tibetan Buddhists, or Chinese, or Japanese, or Koreans, or Vietnamese, with whom I have greater connection, and also Sri Lanka and Thailand, Burma, a few people come to my teachings. I come in contact with few of them. So I always tell everybody, all of these people, that we have to be today a 21st century Buddhist. What that means is we cannot take Buddhism as our some kind of our custom, like saying that I'm a Buddhist because my parents are Buddhist. But we need to do study of Buddhism and understand the unique features of Buddhism and what differences it has with other religious traditions. Then we will know what Buddhism is talking about, and therefore this is the reason why I say we need to be 21st century Buddhist. And on the other hand, our education has rather improved, and the more the educational system is becoming improving, people's using intelligence also becomes better. And also there is great change materially in the material world. And there are lots of distractions on the outside. when that is happening, if we don't have if we don't pay attention to the inner values, which can go together with the material values, then we would be rather carried away by the distractions, all these external distractions. And therefore, Buddhism is about making transformation within our minds by using our mind. So this is you should know this. So there may be many Tibetans who have come from Tibet, the recent arrivals, and raise your hands. So inside Tibet, there are very few teachers who teach Buddhism, and it has become, because of the control, the Chinese control and restrictions, you really have very little opportunity to do study of Buddhism. In order to study Buddhism, you have to follow certain rules by the Chinese. You have to go through what is known as re-education and so forth. So you have to follow the communist rules, which is very difficult. And therefore you have very little opportunity to study Buddhism, and therefore I am talking to you, and please listen carefully. So Buddhism, in order to practice Buddhism, you have to study it, practice it based on your study and understanding. So you have to see how people who are more or less distracted to the external world, such as music and different sights, beautiful sights, and also good food, nutritious food, and also scents, fragrance, perfumes. So all these sensual objects, the visual objects, sounds, odor, taste, and tactile objects. And because of being obsessed with them, then they also indulge in all kinds of sensual experiences. And they enjoy the music and sights, good sights, beautiful sights, and so forth, and spend their life in that kind of distraction. And so for them, their happiness is more or less dependent on these external distractions. So long as these external distractions are there, then they keep themselves joyous or happy. Whereas once they stop, then they are not able to kill their time, and they cannot do much. They feel they have nothing much to do, and therefore in order to spend their time, they go around the world. So what happens at the end is, when these sufferings like aging, sickness, and meeting with what they don't want, and not meeting with what they want, when these happen to them, they become rather desperate, and they tend even, it leads them even to the point of thinking of committing suicide. So what religion teaches is, of course, we need all these material things, such as food, clothing, to nourish us and to keep our body warm, and also the other necessities in life. These are favorable conditions for our living. But then mental happiness or joy has to mainly come from our in the world of mind, and so even when you are lonely, living all by yourself, you can still live very happily by using your mind. And it is not just about being imaginary and about just imagining things and where there is nothing real there, but we are dealing with reality here. And then there are cases there where even though things are facts, but then people tend to deny those facts, and so they develop what is known as the wrong views, wrong notions, which are exaggerated on the one hand, and on the other hand, just denying. And so you have to, with regard to Buddhism, what we are talking is we have to know the reality as it is, and then accordingly deal with the situations. And therefore, when we face with the sufferings of aging, sickness, death, meeting with what we don't want, and we're not meeting with what we desire, and so forth, we can think that these are, of course, nature. And we can also think that whatever happens to us is because of our karma, and therefore this kind of thinking can help stop anger and desperation and so forth. So there is a big difference between people who believe in religion and not believe. So I know some friends who have suffered under the Chinese, and when they talk, of course, when people who have lived under the communist, when they talk about their suffering, they become very intense about it. Whereas on the other hand, we also have problems, but although physically we also suffer, but we suffer less mentally. And therefore, because of knowing the reality as it is, then we are able to deal with things with a realistic approach. As it is said in Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, if there is a way out, then why be unhappy? If there is no way out to overcome sufferings, then what is the use of becoming unhappy or worrying about them? And therefore, this is what Buddhism is talking about, using our mind and dealing with the problems. And especially within Buddhism, what we are following is the Nalanda tradition, in which we make difference between, distinguish between what can be literally taken, with regard to Buddha's teaching, what can be literally taken and what cannot be taken literally. And therefore, there's great emphasis on examining the teaching of the Buddha. And therefore, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and Buddhapalita, Asanga, all these great masters, if you look at their teachings, their book writings, then you will see how much examination, analysis, and investigation they have done in the teaching of the Buddha. And they have not just remained satisfied with the scriptural authority of the Buddha, but they have done very fine analysis, and then when they found that certain teachings are not in accord with reasoning, then they reject them as being literal, that such teachings are to be literally taken. And Buddha himself has said, "O bhikshus, or monks and scholars, or wise people, just as gold is tested by rubbing, cutting, and burning, likewise you should thoroughly investigate my teaching and accept them through your own investigation, but not because of your devotion to me." So, whereas most of the other teachers of other traditions say that the followers must listen to what they have said, and not ask the followers to check their religion. And so Buddhism teaches that we have to use reasoning. So in order to use reasoning, in order to understand Buddhism well, we have to use reasoning, and therefore there's no way without understanding well you can follow it well. And so therefore I'm always telling people that you have to study the texts. And when I have time, I also read the Tenjur, the translations of the commentaries by Indian masters on the words of the Buddha, and these serve as the key to understanding the teaching of the Buddha. And then when you are able to understand the different philosophical traditions and see their differences and what are the differences and similarities and so forth, then you find them to be amazing. And the teaching of the Buddha regarding impermanence of things and interdependent nature of things, which these talk about the reality of things on the basis level. And the Four Noble Truths is also talking about dealing with the reality of things. And then accordingly we have to follow their path and so forth. And so in Buddhism there is the establishment of the reality, and on the basis of that then we have the philosophical understandings, and based on those we do our practices. Therefore I make three divisions in Buddhism: the contents of the Kanjur, the translated words of the Buddha, and then the commentarial teachings, into three categories. One is the Buddhist science. So when you deal with Buddhist science, you do not have to talk about positive and negativity and so forth, or be good and bad. And then the Buddhist philosophy, secondly, there is that of the philosophical aspect of Buddhism, which is to say that the teaching of the Buddha is about the interdependent nature of things, which is dealing with reality. And I also say, even to some Muslims, I tell them that this view of interdependence is something which they can also learn. If they know it well, then it can help them in their thinking. Whether they are followers or believers or non-believers, they can still follow these the views and the reality. The Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy, which are universal, and then within Buddhism we have the Buddhist religion, and this is for the Buddhists and not others who are not Buddhists as such. Whereas the Buddhist science, mainly Buddhist science, which is something very universal, and also the philosophy, or Buddhist philosophy, where we do not have to talk about this being good or bad and anything like that, but that things are dependently arising, this also is universal. And therefore, when in the last over 30 years, I had interaction with Western scientists. In the beginning, when I met with some scientists, some of them had some attitude that Dalai Lama is a Buddhist, and then we are scientists. So what is there that we can actually discuss with this Buddhist monk? They had this kind of attitude. But then once we began our study, discussion, and then they found that Buddhism does not assert or accept a creator God, nor do they accept any kind of a soul theory. And on the other hand, Buddhism accepts that of relativity of things or interdependent nature of things. And so gradually they take more interest in took more interest in Buddhism. Whereas scientists rather keep distance from other religious traditions, saying, okay, this is the religion. Whereas they find that Buddhism, of course, is a religious tradition, but then Buddhism also emphasizes on that of reasoning, and not only based itself on that of faith and belief. Therefore, because Buddhism is based on the investigation of the reality of things, and accordingly developed a philosophical view and then developed the practices, therefore the scientists pay more attention to the Buddhism. And so, therefore, I am telling you, the Tibetan newcomers, to study Buddhism and use your mind, and in order to have a peaceful community, peace of individual community, and whereas if while you call yourselves Buddhist, maybe you are easily provoked with anger, and this is not what you should do. But where you have to make yourself able to confront the situations and not become angry. And by using your intelligence, you have to be able to deal with the problems. So old men and women, you also should study Buddhism. Having come to Dharamsala, you should tell people back home that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is telling us, even the old men and women, to put effort in studying the Buddhism. Usually we have this attitude that if when we are old, then we should just suffice ourselves with recitation of mantras and so forth and not really study. But Sakya Pandita, the Sakya Master, has said that even if you were to die tomorrow, you must study, you must learn the different sciences. And so that in the next life you may not be like a foolish person who, the Tibetan analogy for that is like a donkey who doesn't know anything. But so even if you are going to die tomorrow, you die tomorrow, you have to study Buddhism to leave imprints for the next life. And you have to understand, in order to practice the Dharma, you have to understand it. There's a big difference between someone who practices by understanding the Dharma and who practices without understanding it. It's a huge difference. And so Mainly, Buddhism teaches what Buddhism teaches in essence is that of the practice of non-violence or not harming, and the philosophical view of interdependent nature. And with regard to the first one, that is non-violence, even Jainism and other traditions all have great practice of it, whereas in Buddhism, so this is common to Buddhism. And then in other traditions, they talk about doing practicing or cultivating compassion and so forth because of the theory of creation. They say that those who follow theistic religions, they say that we must have love towards all sentient beings, all creatures, because we are all the same creature of the same creatures of the same God, the Creator. And that is the reason they use, which is very good. Isn't it? Whereas in Buddhism, when we talk about practicing non-violence or compassion, not harming others, the reason we say this is because our suffering and pain and pleasure are results of our causes and conditions. And if you create a cause which brings about happiness, you'll have happiness as a result. And if you create the cause for suffering, you'll have the painful experience. And therefore, if you harm others, then what you are creating is a cause or karma for painful experience. If you become, for example, it's very obvious that if you try to harm somebody, hit somebody, or fight with somebody out of anger, then you also hurt the other person as well as hurting yourself. But when the anger has subsided, then perhaps you might feel rather shy and ashamed. So having fought with someone in the neighborhood, and the next day when you have to pass by that person's house or something, you feel rather shy and ashamed, embarrassed. So rather than doing that, if we are able to help others and have their trust and confidence and be friends with the person, then you'll be happy. So even in our life, we can see that by harming others, you are unhappy. And if you deceive others, deep down in your heart, you might always suspect or become doubtful that in one day, the other person might know your deception. Whereas if you are very sincere and earnest in helping others, you don't have to feel embarrassed or ashamed, or you don't have to worry about showing your true color and so forth. Whereas the communist Chinese are very apt at lying and deceiving others. So what they are worried about is losing their power and authority, and so they are full of self-centeredness. And because of this, they are not able to be very honest. So if they were more honest and dedicated to the well-being of others, then they will win trust from others, and then there will be friendship with others. Otherwise, even if they may have food with some people, take meal together, you cannot be friends if you are all full of distrust. So Hu Jintao's slogan, harmonious society, is of course what we need. But this has to come not from fear, not by causing fear and anxiety in people, but by winning their trust and confidence. And therefore, compassion or altruism is the root of our happiness. It also helps in our health to prevent sickness and disease. So this is the main cause for happiness and health. So even scientists today say this. If someone is obsessed with anger all the time and jealousy and so forth, then this will be harmful to us physically. If you are very calm and compassionate, loving, then it also helps in in strengthening our immune system. So, not to talk about the next life, but even in this life, you'll be physically healthy, mentally happy and joyous, and then you'll be have greater friendship, better friendship with people, and so harmony in society must come through these causes. So why we are saying talking about the need for not harming others is because of this idea or understanding of interdependent nature of things. Nobody wants suffering, but still we cause suffering to ourselves. We do not do it intentionally, but unintentionally or out of ignorance. And then Shantideva says, although they want to overcome suffering, they run after suffering. Whereas, although they do want happiness, they destroy the cause of happiness, like overcoming their enemies. So, if you look in the media and what's happening in the world today, for example, the recent tsunami and earthquake in Japan, these are, of course, natural disasters. But other than that, there are other things, disasters that are man-made, such as people suffering because of inequality and dishonesty in governance and so forth. So these kinds of miseries that are caused by ourselves, we cause them out of ignorance, not knowing what brings us suffering and not knowing what brings us happiness and how to avoid those causes of suffering and so forth. So when we talk about these pain and pleasure, we don't have to just resort to the authority of the Buddha's words, but we live in a society. We are human beings, as social animals. Our happiness and joy, pleasure, pleasant experiences are dependent on others. Our economic development and so forth also are dependent on others. So if you think from the point of view of interdependence, then you'll have rather holistic view of how to make gain money and so forth. But if you don't think about it, if you neglect that, then you will be rather selfish and narrow-minded. So, because in most cases we see only one dimension of the things, we create lots of problems for ourselves. Whereas if you look at things from different angles and have a holistic view, then the things will be different. We are going to be able to deal with the problems in a better way. And therefore, understanding of interdependence is very essential, and you should also study Buddhism. And if you understand this, then it will be better for you. So I wish to tell you this. And then, as I said earlier, there was earthquake in New Zealand, and then there was a huge flood in Australia, and also in Russia. In many regions of Russia, there's drought, and also in China, many parts of China, there's been lots of drought, and also in Japan, the tsunami, and because of which there was this huge disaster, and because of the tsunami, and then the damage also happens to some nuclear reactors in Japan, which also cause some danger to people. So we should make prayers for everyone who have suffered, who are suffering, and also ourselves, Tibetans, who are going through a difficult time, and people have died untimely death, and there are people who. And then recently, just a few days ago, we had one Amdo monk who self-immolated himself, and so for all of them we should make prayers. And I wish to say this also. And during this month of miracle, what we do is, because we are commemorating the enlightened deeds of the Buddha, we have the tradition. So during this, and therefore we have this tradition of reading a story from the Jataka Mala. And I also here wish to say something about the Tibetans, something about that is related to the Tibetans. We have become refugees for 52 years now. On the one hand, we are refugees. And during this period of time, of course, there has been some progress and development in Tibet. The late Panchen Rinpoche has said that, of course, there has been progress in development in Tibet, but what Tibet has suffered it cannot be matched by these developments. And so all Tibetans inside Tibet are living in fear and anxiety and always in suspicion. Even in China, it's not just the Tibetans, but even the Chinese themselves. I met some Taiwanese recently, a friend of mine. He told me that some Chinese from the mainland China, students and tourists, come to Taiwan, and I asked him what impression they get once they are in Taiwan. And the answer he gave me was that after a few months in Taiwan, they get the feeling that they are in a completely different country. In their own country, mainland China, they have to live in fear and anxiety, and they have lots of difficulties and problems. And especially with regard to Tibet, we have the unique characteristics of Tibetan culture. When they when they become rather slightly obvious to the Chinese, and then everything the Chinese government suppresses the Tibetans. And many people in the world, around the world, are now better aware of Tibetan situation. And many scientists have also taken interest in Tibetan Buddhism, and so no other religions or followers of religions have been able to have such an interaction with the Tibetans and Tibetan Buddhism. In the past, Westerners have called Tibetan Buddhism Lamaism. On the one hand, they are not to be blamed because the Vinaya practice, the monastic discipline, monasticism, celibacy is the basis of Buddhism. Of course, people have kept the Vinaya discipline and vows, but lived in monasteries, and there were people or are people who pretend to be great teachers, but then they indulge in alcohol and sex and so forth. And then we also have this custom of wearing masks and doing some mask dance and so forth. So because of all these externality of the external factors, people have called Tibetan Buddhism Lamaism, as if it were not a true Buddhism. One time I was in Australia. I attended this world conference on religions. And I met some Burmese monks at that conference. And so it seems that Burma has very good practice of mindfulness and vipassana and shamatha. And so these Burmese monks had asked to see me, and then I also was happy to see them. And then I wore this yellow robe. And when I met them, they said, of course, we are following the same Buddha, the same teacher, but there is big difference between us and your. And so I thought that, they are saying this because of all these external practices that we have. Such as doing tantric practice and doing the ritual cham or the dance, wearing masks and so forth. So, of course, we have been doing this for centuries, but we have not been able to overcome the evils and so forth. Whereas, of course, if these practices of Tantra, such as using rituals to overcome evils and so forth, were done with the help of single-pointed concentration and higher practices, they would bring some effect. And then we have practices where we suppress evils and also burn them and so forth, but without the real cultivation of concentration, single-pointedness of mind and so forth. If we do this home practice, so there is a practice where you boil some oil, and then through your practice in the ritual, then you put some kind of alcohol into it at a certain point, and then it burns. And when there's a huge crack of fire, and people say, "Oh, today this ritual has been very effective." So when this was being done, and then the attendant to the Lama who was performing this ritual put this alcohol in some kind of a container or the stomach of some animal. It was, and then when he threw this, so the attendant prepared this. And when the Lama who was actually performing the ritual, when he threw it, because the stomach of the animal was, the alcohol was wrapped in the stomach, when the Lama was going to throw it into the hot oil, he wasn't able to actually throw it into the oil, but it just rolled down on the ground. And then the attendant ran after it and put it into the hot oil. In order to, so the attendant's idea was to make a huge sound with this when the alcohol was thrown into the oil, so that it burst, and it wasn't successful. And then at the end of the Tibetan year, the Namgyal monastery monks in the past used to do certain ritual. And when this was done, when this practice of burning the oil or causing fire in the oil by throwing this alcohol was done after it, then and when the oil burst, it would spill all over the ground, and then the Tibetan nomads would come on the ground and they would just roll their body. They were wearing animal hides, and so because of that they would roll on the oil so that it helps their jackets. But when doing these rituals, people in most cases did not have real powerful concentration, but these rituals were still done. And Namgyal Monastery in the past used to have good ritual practice, but not real study of the Dharma. And so after coming into exile, I started this curriculum of study curriculum for the Namgyal monks, and also in the lower and higher tantric colleges, Gyudo and Gyume. I also urged people to engage in study of Buddhism, and also the nuns. I have encouraged them to study Buddhism, and since then they have done it, and now we have nuns who have done quite a lot of study, that they are almost to the point of becoming female geishis. So after coming to exile, I have urged people, the monasteries and nunneries where they did not have philosophical study in the past in Tibet, to do these studies of philosophy. And monasteries are not only meant for performing rituals and going out into lay people's homes to do rituals, to perform rituals and so on, but to study. I also teach the geishis, the learned monks. We should not just focus on what we have had in our tradition, but for example, in the case of debate, the dialectical debate, we have to be able to use this logic that we use to study the Dharma to other subjects, secular subjects as well. So we should not just be satisfied with what we have so far. We have in the past, we didn't think about making any kind of a progress and advancements, but we just use what we had. And then this is the case also with the Chinese communist authorities. They still hold on to their ideology, communism, and whatever their ideology is, and not try to change in order to be able to go on par with the rest of the world. Things are changing in the world, but they want to still remain the same. So although we have come into exile and become refugees, we have done some innovations, made some innovations in our study of the Dharma and so forth. So we should not be satisfied with what we have already. So we have to make changes and make progress as well. Buddhism is one of the major religions in the world, and within it we have the Pali tradition and Sanskrit tradition. The latter is more broader, and especially we have the study of logic and epistemology. This is because of the master, the Abbot Shantarakshita, who was himself a great logician and a great philosopher, and also Master Kamalashila, his student, and who helped establish Buddhism in Tibet. And so we have the study of all the philosophical thoughts of Buddhism and non-Buddhist traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, we have all these study of the different philosophical thoughts, and this is not something which is there in the Chinese and Japanese Buddhism. In Mongolia also, there were immensely great scholars, learned masters of Buddhism in Mongolia, Mongolian masters. And for example, in my case, when I was a child, when I was pursuing my studies of philosophy, I had there are many different commentaries written by Mongolian scholars, such as Belden Chöche and so forth. And I asked the Mongolians if they did a dialectical debate in their own language. They said no. Even today, they cannot do this in their own language. When it comes to using logic of consequences and so forth, talking about the absurd consequences and so forth, they cannot do this kind of dialectical debate in their language. And so this is something which we have in Tibet, and Tibetan language is something which can explain Buddhism very precisely. Like that of Sanskrit, and through logic. So we have the complete teaching of the Buddha, and we have this language which can also through which we can study that of logic and epistemology. And so the Tibetan language, through this language, has done great service to preservation and promotion of Buddhism for over 1,000 years. So, of course, in the other subjects, secular subjects like modern subjects, so science and so forth, we didn't have the opportunity to use this language in the past. But this language is something which is on par with Sanskrit, which can be comparable with Sanskrit. And so we have to be proud of this, our language. So when it comes to Buddhism, we should not stay like the same like in the past, but we have to study Buddhism. So when I met the Burmese monks, they said we have big difference between us. And then recently also I met some Burmese monks who said that in Tibetan Buddhism you have Tantra, and therefore they said that they heard that Tibetan monks, because they do practice Tantra, they can marry. And so this is not the case. They have not really learned the fact about Tibetan Buddhism as such. And of course we have people who the previous Karmapa Rinpoche's attendant was first a monk, and then he disrobed, and then later on he disrobed, and then he had long hair and wore the hair in a certain style, and wore a huge earrings, and he told me that to be monk is not easy. You have to, on the one hand, be bald, shaven-headed, and then on the other hand, you have to restrain sex. And so I saw recently one monk who had long hair. And then I asked him whether he was a monk, and he said yes. And then I told him, if you are a monk, then you should not have long hair. You have to cut your hair, and you have to, if you are not a monk, but in the tantric, you have to wear the robes accordingly, white robes. And some lamas say that they are monks, but they have what is known as a secret consort, and they have wives. Of course, if you are able to, if you have reached a certain level of spiritual attainment where you are able to but you are able to control the ejection of the vital semen, and are able to have you are able to do that and use the clear light minds actually in your meditation. And then, of course, that may be special, but we have very few people. It's very rare to find such people. And so these Burmese monks have said that the Tibetan monks can marry. How is that the case? How possible? And so, because of our own doing, people get such misunderstandings, misconceptions. And so, on the other hand, regarding Tibetan politics, when I was little, we had a regent who had the authority over the Tibetan governance, and then because of not being honest with the common people, at that time Tata Rinpoche was the regent. And at that time, one subject from the Pala estate, one of the aristocrats, Pala, there was a legal case against this subject of the Pala estate, and this common person, common man, has come to Potala. And then during that hearing in Potala, there was some kind of a hole on the roof of where this legal proceeding was going on, and the sweepers in Potala used to listen through the walls, and then they were also peeping through the holes that were on this roof. And one of the sweepers called me, and I just creeped over there, and I sneaked in, and then I looked down, peeped down from the hole that was in the ceiling, on the side of the ceiling. And so, although the legal proceeding was going on, and then the defendant was making his point, but then instead of listening to what he had to say, the regent was actually scolding him without listening to him. And then I felt that if we have no honesty in this kind of proceedings, then it's really bad. So even at that time, as a child, I had thought that the Tibetan governance of where one person has the authority of both over the temporal and spiritual authority, is not really a good system. So after I was enthroned, then I started a reform committee. And so because the previous system was rather biased, I started a petition department, a separate department for petitioning and then the UTOC UTOC was overseeing that proceeding, and one time one of the defendants went to the residence of UTOC, and after taking the bribe from this defendant, then UTOC called this person in the proceeding room and called him in and said, yesterday you came to me with your bribe, and UTOC said to him that this case cannot be decided just because you bribed me. I have to see who has the truth, and I cannot decide your case on the basis of this bribe, and so take this back. And so this made some news at that time, that UTOC was being honest with the people. And so this is something, some kind of innovation at that time that I made, the reform committee. And then after coming to exile in the 60s, I started the democratic system of governance for Tibetans. And so Tibetans also say that our democracy is actually a gift from His Holiness. So in the last 10 years, we had elected leadership. The Kalun Tipa has been elected by the people themselves, and it's not something that I had an involvement as making decision. So from that time onwards, since we had the elected leadership, the temporal, there has been change in the governance of Tibetan administration by a single person with both the temporal and spiritual authority. So since then, 10 years have passed. And now, in order to have a full democracy, democratic system, without the rule of some kind of religious teacher or kings and queens, we have to follow the trends of the free world, which is that of democratic system. For example, India, of course, it has huge population, lots of problems, and there are many different languages. Eastern Indians, Southern Indians, Western, Northern have many their own different religion and culture. But still, India as a whole remains very stable as a democratic country. Whereas in China, the authorities have to spend so much money on security. It's not that the money that they spend on internal security is more than exceeds that of the defense budget. The Communist Party is supposed to be for the welfare of the people. And so if the authorities, the leaders are elected by the people, then it would be good, meaningful. Whereas if the authorities have to keep power at the barrel of the gun, then it's not really good. So I feel that it's not good that I, as the Dalai Lama, keep the power, the ultimate absolute power over the spiritual and temporal and spiritual. So during the first 4 Dalai Lamas, the Dalai Lamas didn't have any temporal responsibility, whereas this started since the 5th Dalai Lama. Now we are in the 21st century. Now it is the right time to make changes now. Of course, change will happen eventually, but if it were to happen through pressure from people, then I think that it would be a disgrace to the Dalai Lamas as well. Since the 5th Dalai Lama, Ngawang Gyatso, the Dalai Lamas took this responsibility of temporal and spiritual responsibility of the Tibetan nation. And so I am the 14th Dalai Lama. Now, with pride and happily, if I end this rule of the Dalai Lamas, it would be great. No one can make this decision for me, but I can do it. And therefore, if we have a political leader who is elected by the people, who can take this responsibility of the Tibetan governance, political side, then it would be very good. So if it remained like now, then when I'm no more here, then it would be like something is not completed. So as for me, maybe I can boast about it. I have done quite a deal for the Tibetan cause, and Tibetans inside Tibet are trusting me, and the exiled Tibetans also are trusting me, and then there are many other people around the world who trust me. And so at such a time, if I leave this temporal power over the Tibetan government or administration and return to the original status that I had, the Dalai Lamas had during the first 4 Dalai Lamas. The first Dalai Lama was even called an ecumenical master of the yellow hat. Although the second Dalai Lama was called that. So if I could also return to that kind of status of holding the religious authority, then I could work more for the promotion of human values and also to promote religious harmony in the world, in which fields I have made some contribution, of course. And so I get many invitations from different people in different societies, universities and so forth. They're not asking me to come to teach Buddhism as such, but how to promote these values, human values of compassion and so forth. So people are happy to listen to me, the Dalai Lama. So when I am in such a position, in such a scenario, when I can end this rule of the political rule or authority of the Dalai Lama, it would be a great, a graceful one. So if usually when we have some kind of a function, we say, oh, now we have come to the end, and we have we are actually concluding this in a victorious manner or something like that. So similarly, if I can also change the status of taking the responsibility of the political affairs of Tibet rather victoriously, it would be good. Nobody else can do this, but I can do it. I, who hold this status of a political leader of the Tibetan people, who is in line of the Dalai Lamas. So I also get calls from Tibet saying that the people have heard that I'm going to leave the political power and authority, and therefore people are rather worried that they would be left without anyone to look for. So they don't have to worry. So the Godin Potang was started during the second Dalai Lama, Gendun Gyatso, during which he didn't have any kind of temporal or political authority. So I am also thinking that if I could live as a religious leader, perhaps I may not be a disgrace to people. And if people could also agree, then I could return to that kind of status. So we are following a very democratic system of governance, and people also have, and people could also see this fact, and on the other hand, Chinese say that we have no problem. There's no such thing as Tibetan issue, but the issue is Dalai Lama. And so all this could end. So this can be seen as being lie and untrue by the people of the world. And devolving the political power, should not make you feel disheartened and discouraged. You should still have. So this is done with the. I'm doing this for the benefit of the long-term benefit of the Tibetan cause and the Tibetan exiles community, so that they can actually move forward. So we have actually become modernized society. So you should understand this. So I'm not discouraged or disheartened, and I have not given up on the cause of Tibet. This is not at all true. I am a Tibetan, someone from the land of snows, and so each and every Tibetan has the responsibility over the Tibetan problem, Tibetan issue. So I'm a Tibetan from Amdo. So until my death, I have the responsibility over the Tibetan cause. So while I'm still healthy, if you Tibetans can take full responsibility over the Tibetan affairs, then when you face some problem, of course, I'm still here. I've not given up on you, and I'm not disheartened. So because of all these, we have followed a democratic system, and I'm asking you also to take full responsibility for this democratization, for advancing the democratic system of the Tibetan governance, administration, affairs. So you should all be Tibetans, or should not worry about. I just met a Chinese who said that he was here for about 10 or something years ago, and he also came back again, and people are very active, taking very active roles in the voting system of voting, and the democratic system in the Tibetan society has really made advancements, he said to me. And so my decision to devolve my power and is also for this, for further development and progress in our democratic system. So those of you who have come from Tibet, you can talk, you can tell this to people inside Tibet. Of course, this may be broadcast on the radio. So this decision that I'm making is made after giving thought to it for decades, for years and years. But on the other hand, the Garden Podang is the institution of the Dalai Lamas. So as long as I live, I need an institution. So this Garden Podang will still remain. But what is happening is that the Garden Podang is leaving out the political responsibility. And then for Tibetans, regarding the future incarnations, the next Dalai Lamas, 15, 16, 17, and so forth, will come if the Tibetans, mainly the Tibetans, and also the Trans-Himalayan regions and other people who follow Tibetan Buddhism wants the Dalai Lama to continue, their incarnation to continue. So the Garden Podang will still remain intact. And so in the long, if you think about it, in the long term, then this change, that the decision I am making is has great benefits in the long run for the Tibetan. So what I'm asking to make changes in the Charter of the Tibetan Exiles is, regarding the Garden Podang, is to make changes to the effect that the Garden Podang is no more the government of Tibet, but Garden Podang is just the institution of the Dalai Lamas, but so the Tibetan word shung may not necessarily translate as government. So one journalist in India, in Delhi, one time said that Samdong Rinpoche is the Prime Minister of Tibetans, and then also he used the term Tibetan government. So I clarified to this journalist that we don't use these titles, Prime Minister or the government of Tibet in exile and so forth, but we call our administration the Central Tibetan Administration. So because we need to know the situation of Tibetans in exile, we need to help the Tibetans in exile. We need some organization, but we don't call this administration a government of exiled Tibetan government as such. So the change that I'm asking is to call the organization that looks after the Tibetans as the Central Tibetan Administration and not the Tibetan government in exile as such, and not the Garden Podang. So we are following a democratic system where people elect their leaders, and if this could also be emulated in Tibet, inside Tibet, whatever the case may be in the rest of China, if we could have this kind of system in Tibet itself, then we would be very helpful, good. So you should not worry about my devolving the responsibility, the political responsibility. This is what I wish to explain to you. So we are on the 24th chapter of the Jataka Mala. The Great Ape. When the virtues are endured by others, they are tormented less by their own pain than for the merits thus forfeited by those who have endured them. So the holy beings, when they are caused harm or hurt by others, they of course suffer, but then they become sorry. They feel sorry for the one who caused them injury and hurt. At one time, the Bodhisattva showed just this. Near the snow mountain lies a blessed region, rich and inviting, fragrant as the sweetest of aloes, its mantle of magnificent forests as lush as dark silk. Birds of myriad colors and shapes, such as Telding and Shangshang, enhance the landscape, which is so harmonious in shape and color that it appears to express a grand design. Here, celestial beings spot in the clear waters of spring-fed mountain streams that flow over rocky ledges and tumble down cliffs in great waterfalls. Hummingbees abound, and the breezes fan the flowering trees. Here, the Bodhisattva once took birth as a great ape that lived alone. Even in that animal state, the Bodhisattva had not lost his awareness of the Dharma. Kind, infinitely patient, and of a sweet and firm nature, he was blessed with an imperishable compassion, boundless as the sky. So because of the past imprints, this Bodhisattva must have had this kind of traits, and also perhaps he was also in that life a Bodhisattva who has really evolved highly spiritually. For though the earth with its forests, great mountains and deep oceans has perished countless times through water, fire and wind, the great compassion of the Bodhisattva is never destroyed. This huge ape lived like an ascetic, subsisting exclusively on the simple fare of leaves and fruits, and bringing whatever aid he could to the creatures within this sphere, his sphere. One day it came to pass that a certain farmer, having gone in search of a stray cow, completely lost his way. Unable to determine his location from the star map of the sky, he wandered utterly at random until finally he reached the domain of the Great Ape. There, exhausted by hunger, thirst, heat and fatigue, his heart ablaze with a fire of misery and his mind oppressed with the weight of his despair, he threw himself down at the foot of a tree. Casting hungry looks here and there, he spotted a number of sour tinduka fruit lying scattered on the ground. The pangs of his hunger made their bitterness seem sweet, so sweet in fact that he began to search for their source. He did not have far to look. Rooted in a rocky slope at the edge of a waterfall, the tree grew out over the precipice, its branches laden with a heavy clustered fruit, tawny and inviting. Filled with craving, the farmer mounted the slope and, climbing the tree, reached a branch heavy with fruit. In his eagerness to obtain the fruit, he crawled out to the very end of the branch. Suddenly, unable to bear his weight, the branch snapped as if chopped off by a hatchet. With a cry, he fell headlong over the cliff. Holding on to the branch for dear life, he fell into the ravine and into a pool of deep water which was surrounded by steep rock walls. The leaves of the branch cushioned his fall, preventing any broken bones, and he was able straightaway to climb out of the cold water, but looking in all directions he could find no escape from the forest chasm. Realizing that he would soon starve to death, he burst into tears, the arrow of despair piercing his heart. Overwhelmed by distress, he cried out, "Alas, here in the midst of a remote forest, far from any human ears, I have fallen into a pit like a wild beast caught in a trap. No one, no matter how carefully they search, will ever find me except death. No relatives or friends can hear my cries, only the swarms of mosquitoes who come to drink my blood. I shall never again see the streams, the sky resplendent with its jewels-like stars. I sit here in total darkness, while the black night of this pit hides me from the world." Thus lamenting, he passed many days in the deep pit, sustained solely by the water of the pool and few tenduka fruits that had fallen with him. Now the great ape happened to wander through the part of the forest in search of food, beckoned by the branches of the tenduka tree rustling in the wind. He climbed the tree and peering over the waterfall, saw the emaciated body of the man lying at the bottom of the pit, eyes and cheeks sunken and pale, obviously weak from hunger. The compassion of the great ape was instantly aroused. Entirely forgetting his own search for food, he fixed his gaze on the man far below and in human voice called out, "You there, what are you doing in this pit inaccessible to men? Who are you and how come you to be here?" The man in the pit casting... So perhaps we don't need to continue the reading. So his son is now explaining, perhaps in the Himalayas, the Bodhisattva ape was born there in a place where he lived on fruits and other vegetables, and a cowherd had lost his cow and went in search of his cow, and then he lost his way but became very hungry and thirsty, and then he found a tenduka fruit tree. So he ate fruits from that tree and drank the water. So he found the source of the fruit on the cliff. So because he tasted the fruit, he went to get more of the fruits from the tree on the slope of the cliff. Slowly as he went to get the fruit, because of his weight, the branch broke and he fell down the cliff into the pit. And because of the water and the branch of the tree, the leaves of the tree, he was saved. He didn't die, but he was in a pit where he could not find escape from. So in Tibet, in Gadong, in the area where Gadong Monastery is, there is such a pit where it is said that the ground kind of just collapsed, And I also saw such a pit somewhere, and when you look through it, you feel rather fear. And so this in the so I don't want to read through the text, but what if I say what I remember. So the Bodhisattva ape came there, and then the person was he saw the man lying down there in the pit, and then the Bodhisattva wanted to save the person. But before actually going to the person, he exercised himself, trained himself, whether he could carry the person, and he picked up some stone and tried to jump from the cliff and so forth, and then he increased the size of the rock that he would carry, and then trained himself. After training himself and found that he would be able to save the person, then he went to the human being, the person down there, and saved him from that pit. And the person was saved alive, and then after having saved his life, the man, what he thought was, instead he tried to kill the ape while he was lying soundly asleep, and when he hit a huge tree on the head of the ape, in order to kill him, what happened was, because of his weakness, he was not able to hit on the head fully, but it hit a part of the head of the monkey, the ape, and so because the ape had this altruistic nature, what we can find is, if you are truly dedicated for the well-being of others, then it will bear its fruit. What happens to us is we are more or less self-centered, and also because of self-cherishing attitude, and also because of ego grasping, which kind of work together in unison. How we have lived so far until now, since beginner's time, is, if we hear someone saying there's no such a self, we can't believe it. And also when people talk about holding others more dear than ourselves, then we tend to think that how is this possible? But if you use our intelligence, and if we check around your neighborhood and other people, you will find that the self-centeredness is the root of all troubles and problems, whereas cherishing others more than oneself and bringing help to others is more bears fruit to benefit oneself. And if you think about reducing self-centeredness and increasing cherishing others, of course you will be able to do that, which has to come through training of the mind. And this is something that I have some experience of, because in the beginning, when I was thinking about bodhicitta, I would think that, this is something very difficult. Of course, it's very good, but it's very difficult. I cannot do it, also thing. But when I thought about emptiness, I could see that this is something I can actually develop the insight into. But after receiving teaching on the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, then I could change my mind slowly. Whereas I was thinking that it is difficult, bodhicitta is difficult, I could think that that this is something possible. What else is there to cultivate other than this? As a human being, having this human intelligence, if I do not devote energy to develop this altruistic attitude of bodhicitta, then what is the use? So I could, and also by seeing the fruit of this practice of altruism, I could feel inspiration. And this is something that I find to be helpful for one's own health, one's mind, and also bring help others. So I think that this is the practice that I should devote to. Even to others, I teach it. So for all kinds of temporary and ultimate goals, this is the main cause which brings about the fruit of goodness. So without actually making some transformation in the self-centeredness, reducing it, and also without having any understanding of selflessness and emptiness, if you're reciting mantras, may not do so much in terms of helping your transformation within. Whereas if you meditate on cherishing others and also compassion, bodhicitta, even 1 hour a day, then this is going to be more beneficial. So I teach this to others. Some people might think that when I give this explanation, some people might get the idea that how is this possible? But through training, this is possible. As Shantideva says, there's nothing which cannot become easier through familiarization. And so once you see the result, then you will develop inspiration from it, and then you will put effort in it, and then you will actually put effort in developing this bodhicitta within yourself. And this bodhicitta also has to come through with the help of the understanding of emptiness, the view of emptiness. This is not some kind of a stubbornness that you are developing. Bodhicitta is not doing something out of stubbornness, but with the help of wisdom. Therefore, with the help of your wisdom, you understand that you have the aspiration to help other sentient beings, as well as wishing to become a Buddha for the benefit of others. Now, in order to be able to help others out of suffering, you have to see that the suffering and its causes are something that you can put an end to, and then develop this wish to become liberated. Renunciation has to be developed, in other words, and then with this you can also think of helping others out of suffering, and therefore with the help of compassion, wishing others out of suffering, you can develop bodhicitta, which is this wish for the benefit of sentient beings and to become a Buddha. Now, having said this, maybe I should do the ceremony for generating bodhicitta. And so I have a friend, American, and then she became a nun, and then she became a bhikshuni, according to the Dharmagupta, the Chinese bhikshuni lineage, when I assist them. And she told me that there was an elderly monk in Thailand, and that Thai elderly monk had actually had a vision of Buddha Shakyamuni himself. And so from that vision he was convinced that the Shakyamuni Buddha was still alive. Of course, not in the mortal body, but in this pure vision. And so because of this vision of Buddha Shakyamuni, he discarded the view that after someone has become an arahat and died after becoming arahat, that person's mind stream, the consciousness, does not end there and become inexistent, but still continues. And then one of his students from Thailand one time had gone on pilgrimage to China, and Kuan Yin in China. And this Thai monk was made some prayer and at the foot of the Kuan Yin statue and touching his head there. And when he was doing that, someone took a picture. What happened was he, on his head, there shone radiated a white light from the heart of the Kuan Yin on his head, and so someone had taken picture of that. So I saw that picture, and also some friends of mine, for example, Taglung Shaprung Rinpoche, when he was giving a teaching one time. The particular teaching that he was giving, the lineage, all the lineage masters of that particular teaching that he was given was seen on the beam of that monastery where he was giving the teaching. And so here also, in order to take this, to participate in this ceremony for generating bodhicitta, imagine the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha, and also the 7 successors to the Buddha, beginning with Kashyapa, the Mahakashyapa, and then also those of the great masters of India, and also the great masters of Tibet, and the 4 different traditions of Tibet and so forth. And now, in order to say, take part in this ceremony, let's say the 7-part prayer. So what you have said is that whatever merit I have attained or gained through the practice of prostrations, making offerings, rejoicing in the virtues, and confessing negativities, and requesting the Buddhas not to pass away, but live in the world and turn the wheel of Dharma. I dedicate all these for the to become fully enlightened, for the benefit of all sentient beings. So these are the 7-part practices, and through which you have accumulated merit and also purified negativities. So bodhicitta is the ultimate infinite altruism. If you look at you can find this to be true from the biographies and life stories of the masters. Like you can find this in the Jataka Mala stories as well as the stories of the Tibetan masters. So while we are alive, if we could cultivate this bodhicitta, you will feel great solace. When you are disheartened, this will be of great help. And also, while you are healthy and active, this will help to reduce your arrogance and negative thoughts, and destructive thoughts and emotions. So you'll have real big heart and calmness. And of course, I'm not saying that I have bodhicitta and I have also that I have the understanding or insight into emptiness, but I have given thought to these and for over 40 years. So in essence, what is needed is that of warm-heartedness, kindness. If you have this, then you don't have to buy happiness by spending money or asking others for this or anything like that. But if you give thought and cultivate bodhicitta, every day, day by day, and month by month, week by week, and month by month, and so forth, then you will be happy. It will be helpful in this life as well as next life until you become a Buddha. So this bodhicitta, and Atisha has said that even if it may take eons and eons to have this experience of true bodhicitta within yourself, it is worth. This bodhicitta, which is like the moon and the sun, is worth our endeavor to develop it for eons and eons. And Shantideva says that the Buddhas, having given thought what is the most beneficial thing in the world, they found that bodhicitta is the only thing that benefits, the best source of well-being for everyone. And so all the Buddhas of the past, the present, and the future, what they need to practice, needed to practice, will need to practice is that of bodhicitta. And all the teachings of the Buddha, the vast and the extensive teachings of the Buddha, the profound teachings of the Buddha, all the message of the Buddha in these teachings boil down to this cultivation of this altruism, of bodhicitta. So, although you may be, you'll be thinking of the benefit of others, but as a byproduct, your own happiness is brought about. So when you train your minds, then you'll develop a huge, big courage and resilience to work for the benefit of others. And as Shantideva says in the Bodhicharya Avatara, may I become the sustenance for all until the end of this space. So we'll use the verse, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha until I attain full enlightenment. May the merit that I create or gain through the practices of generosity and so forth become cause for me to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So these are the 4 lines that we will repeat after His Holiness. And so in these lines, the first 2 lines show that of taking refuge, the principle of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So the Buddha here refers to, for example, those of the past Buddhas, who have the beings who have already become Buddhas, enlightened, and also the Sangha here, the Dharma refers to, for example, the Dharma that is within the Buddhas and the Sangha, and then they are therefore those of the causal refuges. Now, the fact that the Buddhas have reached such attainments and is because we have, because of the Buddha nature, the potential that we have, for example, to become a Buddha. So because of this potential, the Buddha nature, we can receive blessings of the Buddha. So on the basis of this, we can talk about receiving blessings. And so in the Mahayana Uttara Tantra, goes through or explains those of the 7, what are called the 7 Vajra points. So you are saying that I'm going to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha until I become fully enlightened, which means that until you realize your full potential as and become a Buddha. And in order, we have to seed for that, which is that of the natural state of the mind, which is that of the empty nature of the mind. And therefore, the the destructive thoughts and emotions and their imprints are something which are not in the intrinsic nature of the mind, but they are temporary. And because the nature of the mind is empty, we can see that these destructive emotions and their imprints are something which we can totally eliminate from our mind stream. And therefore, we have the possibility to become a Buddha. And so you are saying that you are going to become, you wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And the next two lines say that. So please kneel on your right knee and say these lines. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. The practices of generosity and so forth, may they become cause for me to become Buddha for the benefit of all. So you have finished the first recitation. Do it for the second time. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha until I'm enlightened. The practices of generosity and so forth I have done, may they become a cause for me to become a Buddha for the benefit of all. Now, at the end of the third repetition, whatever virtues or merits that you have gained, dedicate them for becoming a Buddha for the benefit of all, for all sentient beings to reach that state of Buddhahood, and also in order to bring all sentient beings, in order to benefit all sentient beings, may I become a Buddha. In other words, in order to bring all sentient beings to the Buddhahood, may I become a Buddha. So in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. The practices of generosity and so forth I have done, may they become cause for me to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain in order to dispel the miseries of sentient beings. Today my life has bore fruit. I've become a child of a Buddha. I will do the practices that are worth of this noble lineage. So with this we have finished the generation of bodhicitta. So this is all for today. I also wanted to say something on the side here. There are people from Tibet, and there are Indians also. So with regard to the Tibetan struggle, we are not looking for independence. We are not struggling for independent Tibet, but we are following a middle way approach, which is of mutual benefit to both the people, the Chinese as well as the Tibetans. So the most important thing is the intellectuals and students whom I have met in the last 30 or 40 years. I've met many of them, all of them, hundreds of them are supportive of this middle way approach. They say that this is something practical and also realistic approach to Tibetan struggle. So they are unanimous about this. So some people here say that Tibetans back inside Tibet are looking for independence. But of course, people who don't think carefully, if you ask them, maybe they will say independence. But if independence were what they're looking for, it is not something that we can obtain right away. But we have to be realistic. Although you may have the wish or aspiration for it, but of course we have the right to fight for independence. But despite that fact, who will actually support us if we say we are fighting for independence, not America, not India, and not the Chinese intellectuals. And so without the support from these different people, and also the Tibetans inside Tibet, hundreds of them whom I've met, hundreds of them. And also, recently I met a Tibetan student who said, he graduated from Chinese university, and he said to me that the thousands of students in his universities in China support this middle way approach. They all agree unanimously. And so some here say that some people in exile say that the Tibetans back in Tibet are looking for independence of Tibet. So they should not say this, because there are people like that inside Tibet who agree with the middle way approach. Jushin Drupara Chebe Kansala Pushi Kyongwa Sheki Sheba Ye Chojon Somayana Veta Shisho Lua Mebe Kemne Kunjo Sunu Tude Sunu Mene Sukandre Su Yerme Shebe Verma Katin Su Sechi Kera Rama Chesu Jie Tuji Rama Tumbes Tubden Gyazo Bedo Yurendo Neshi Tuyo Chojo Kebra Sho Laba Sundere Mitsin Dibe toge ne de ganshen to shirup chawe side para tupden choju gebe tra shishu ne